While scanning the restaurant for my client, my eyes unexpectedly landed on my ex-wife, Emily. She was cozied up with a slightly overweight, middle-aged man who looked like he had once been in good shape but had clearly let himself go over the years. Emily sat next to him, looking utterly content. Everything about this man screamed wealth. As I stood there in the foyer, memories of our past life together came rushing back. Even though 3 years had passed since our divorce, the emotions felt as fresh and painful as if it had all happened yesterday. Instead of being by her side, I found myself watching from a distance, a mere observer to her new life where her desires were met and my troubles had only just begun. It all started with a business trip to Albany for a client meeting. To avoid the exhausting drive back, I had planned to stay overnight. However, just an hour into the trip, the client called to cancel because of a car accident. Although he was fine, he apologized profusely for the inconvenience. I reassured him it wasn't a big deal and suggested we reschedule. Despite my outward calm, the unexpected change in plans left me dreading the 2-hour drive back. Determined to make the best of it, I decided to surprise my wife with a romantic dinner. 90 minutes later, I finally turned onto my street, looking forward to the evening. What greeted me instead were 3 unfamiliar cars parked in my driveway. Knowing Emily often invited friends over when I was away, I brushed it off and parked on the street. I entered the house expecting everything to be normal. However, the sight of clothes scattered across the living room floor immediately set off alarm bells. Standing there, a sinking feeling washed over me as I realized that the sounds I heard were not innocent. My wife's moans were unmistakably those of pleasure, not distress. My heart sank as the painful truth hit me. Emily was cheating on me. Despite my reluctance, I knew I had to confront whatever was happening upstairs. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear her primal screams. Peeking around the bedroom door frame, I was met with a sight that turned my stomach. There were 3 men with her, 2 strangers and her boss, Mark Bennett. They had my wife involved in acts that made my blood boil. My hatred for Mark intensified as he lavished her with praise, exploiting her for his gain. They treated her like a mere object, using vile language and asserting their dominance over her. Watching this, I felt a mixture of anger and disgust, unable to reconcile this woman with the Emily I had known for 10 years. Quietly retreating, I slipped downstairs unnoticed and sought refuge in my office. I grabbed my digital video camera, which fortunately still had some battery life in an old holiday cassette inside. My aim was to record this betrayal, not for any agonizing minutes before my emotions got the better of me. While some might find such a scene arousing, it filled me with nothing but sadness and a deep sense of betrayal. Feeling utterly deflated, I went back downstairs to collect my thoughts in my office. I retrieved my gun from the safe, flicking off the safety just in case. Though I wasn't prone to violence, the urge to take control of things got out of hand was overwhelming. Returning to the living room, I took the car keys and wallets from the pants discarded on the floor. I then went outside and deflated the tires of all the cars, including Emily's. A sinister grin spread across my face as I concocted a plan, sure it would succeed. Noticing Emily's cell phone on the bedside table during my recording, I positioned myself discreetly behind the stairs and dialed her number. After several rings, she finally answered. The silence in the house suggested she had told the others to stay quiet. Breathlessly, she answered, "Hey, David, how's Albany?" I could hear the faint chuckles of the men in the background. "You seem out of breath. Are you okay?" I feigned concern. "Yes, had to run upstairs for my phone," she quickly composed herself. "My client cancelled, so I'll be home soon. How about dinner?" I asked calmly, though inside I was seething. "You're coming home now?" she asked, clearly nervous. "Yeah, just need to get ready, babe. See you soon," she replied hastily and hung up. I smiled, knowing what was about to happen. Just as I expected, 4 naked individuals started rushing down the stairs into the living room. The men quickly dressed, and Emily threw on some clothes as they all scrambled to leave. She slipped on her shoes and jacket, glancing outside, hoping they'd be gone. If she hadn't been so flustered, she might have noticed my car parked on the street. I snuck into the house through a secret door. The men began shouting at Emily all at once, causing her to step onto the porch to try and hear them better. At that very moment, I slammed the front door shut and locked it behind her. Emily caught a glimpse of my face through the window, trying to plead with me, but the time for talking was over. The men came back to the porch, banging on the door and demanding their belongings. Sensing their intentions, I called 911, reporting an attempted break-in. The dispatcher informed me that a neighbor had already called, giving my name and address. The police arrived quickly, within just 2 minutes. After questioning Emily, I approached the officers and informed them that my wife had been mistreated by the men, demanding their arrest. The men immediately protested, claiming they were invited and that everything was consensual. Everyone, including myself, turned to Emily, waiting for her response. Avoiding eye contact, she admitted in a shameful voice that she had indeed invited the men and participated willingly. The men looked relieved as they avoided any charges. Soon, more police cars arrived, and they took down everyone's information. The senior officer then told me that since my wife had invited these men and they were all adults, there was little they could do legally. He suggested counseling, delivering the advice with a disdainful look at Emily. I told the police to call a taxi for her, stating she wasn't allowed back in the house that night. One of the men called a taxi after finding their tires flat. They also tried to accuse me of stealing their belongings, but I denied the claims. I turned back to the porch where Emily remained, waiting for the taxi. I stood there, my eyes burning with anger. Despite my rage, Emily walked towards me, unaware of my fury in the gun I had on me. She might have run if she had known. "David, I'm so sorry," she started, but I cut her off sharply. "You've broken my heart, and I will never forgive you. Mark called you a strumpet, and honestly, it's fitting. From now on, I will refer to you as such and never use your real name again. If you need to communicate with me, do it through Tad." With that, I went back inside, locking the door behind me, leaving her standing outside. She ran back to the group in tears, and Mark tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away, which oddly gave me some satisfaction. However, that feeling quickly faded. Returning to my bedroom, the lingering smell of lemon only fueled my anger. I tore through the room in a rage, throwing the mattress out onto the lawn. I grabbed my toolbox from the garage and dismantled the bed, tossing its pieces outside as well. Back in the bedroom, I picked up Emily's phone, scrolling through her contacts and messages. As expected, I found disgusting emails, photos, and videos of her with various men. It was clear she knew them well. I laughed bitterly at my past ignorance, realizing those days were gone. I took all her belongings from the bedroom and dumped them on the front lawn. Moving to the guest room, I found more of her things. While emptying the last drawer, I felt something jammed inside. Angrily, I yanked it open, revealing several DVDs hidden beneath one of the cases. The case was cracked, but the disc was intact. My heart sank again as I examined the DVDs. I didn't think it could get worse, but it did. Downstairs, I arranged everything on a shelf and started watching the first DVD. It showed Emily with her friend Jessica at Jessica's house, engaging in intimate acts with different people. I watched for hours, tears in my eyes, stopping only at the final 2 discs. The first of the last 2 showed Emily with her tennis instructor, a service I paid for. She always came home too tired for intimacy after her lessons, which now made sense. The second DVD was the worst. It showed Emily in her office with Mark and his boss, Jack Miller, a man with a great reputation in the community. Seeing this, I felt betrayed on another level. I carefully placed her phone, the DVDs, and the tape I had recorded earlier into a large envelope. I planned to give it all to my lawyer and my best friend, Chris Hay, one of the few people I trusted. Nothing else mattered at that moment. I powered up Emily's computer and copied every file, email, photo, and video onto external drives. It took an hour, but I was determined. After that, I sat down to go through her digital archives. I found videos similar to those on the DVDs and explicit photos. Digging deeper, I uncovered emails from the past 6 months, hidden under misleading file names, revealing even more of her betrayals. I uncovered a series of emails between Emily, Mark, and several other men, including exchanges with Jessica. I had dismissed them last week, but one particular email nearly broke me. For a brief moment, the thought of using my weapon crossed my mind, but I quickly realized she wasn't worth it. I needed to stay strong. The email that devastated me was from Emily to Jessica. Jessica had asked why she hadn't left me and to describe her ideal future husband. Emily's response was brutally honest and cut deep. Jessica, I'm done with David. He's faithful but a fool. I'm afraid he's getting close to discovering my double life. He's not entirely clueless, but love blinds him. He's been gaining weight lately, and his growing belly is such a turnoff compared to other men. He's lacking. I hate his beard and mustache, they make him look disgusting. I used to love him, but the excitement of the past few years is too good to give up. His lawyer friend could be a problem if he gets involved. Mark and Jack at work are hinting at promotions and perks with suggestive undertones. I find it amusing. I also want a house and a car. If I play my cards right, I could secure alimony every month. I'm looking forward to our Tuesday party once my tennis injury heals. Mike is amazing. Make sure I get last Thursday's video. It was my first time with so many men. As for my dream man, he must be wealthy, loyal, compliant, and not too bright. He must cater to my every whim without question. I don't care about the bedroom as long as there's money. I laugh. I can get my needs met elsewhere. Sometimes it's just too easy. Damn, David's home now. Got to go. See you Tuesday. Call me. I read this letter over and over, each word more disgusting than the last. The realization that she felt this way about me and that she had been cheating on me for over 2 years was soul-crushing. Was my love so blind? I finally collapsed on the sofa, overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotional pain, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, plagued by a restless night, I called in sick to work. I reached out to my close friend and lawyer, Chris Hayes. His secretary, Linda, answered. I'd known her almost as long as I'd known Chris. I urgently requested a meeting, but she informed me he'd be in court all day. Linda relayed my message, and Chris told her to schedule me in an hour. If he starts bothering you with nonsense, mention Laura White. That'll grab his attention. See you in an hour, I said before hanging up. As I got dressed, my phone rang. Reluctant to speak with Emily, I checked the caller ID. It was an unknown number, so I answered, suspecting it might be Chris. Hello, Mr. Lewis. This is Jack Miller from Emily's office. I'd like to discuss the events from last night at your house. Can we meet today in my office to clarify the situation? Unsure if he knew about the video footage of him with my wife, I realized he was concerned about retaining Mark Bennett's key clients. Emily and Mark were valuable assets to him, and he didn't want to lose them. Additionally, he was likely worried about negative publicity for his company and himself. Mr. Miller, I have an important meeting this morning, but I'll call you back before noon to arrange something for today, I replied calmly. I made it sound like he was negotiating with me, but he was in for a surprise. As I stepped out, I saw what looked like a bizarre yard sale. The broken bed and Emily's clothes were scattered across the lawn. An elderly neighbor waved, clearly curious. I knew I'd become the talk of the neighborhood. In the city center, I grabbed a bite to eat before heading to Chris's office. Linda made me a cup of coffee, lots of cream, no sugar. We had a long history together. Holy crap, David. I don't know what you've got on Chris, but he told me to clear his schedule for today. I could use a month off, she joked. If you want to know who Laura White is, you'll have to ask Chris. By the way, where is he? I asked. He said he'd be here shortly. He needed to reschedule his meeting with the judge, she informed me. Just then, Chris walked in. Holy crap, David. Laura White? You must be in deep trouble to mention that name. Come into my office, and let's talk. Linda, don't patch me through to anyone right now, Chris said quickly. I grabbed my coffee, and he shut the door for privacy. I recounted the events of the previous night and shared what I had discovered about Emily's double life. Then I handed him an envelope with the evidence I had gathered. Chris listened attentively, processing everything. I also told him about Jack Miller's request for a meeting. Well, David, let's prioritize. I've known you for a long time, and I understand you're devastated. Is there any chance for reconciliation with Emily? He asked. Chris, if it were Anna, your wife, and you found those videos and emails, you'd leave her immediately. I want a divorce, but I also want to make her pay for this betrayal. I'm not going to let this slide, I said, my voice filled with anger. All right, first we'll go after Mike and the tennis club. Jessica is off the table since she's just a friend. Emily's workplace is a different story. We'll also sue the 2 clients and their companies who were at your house, and we'll go after Mark Bennett, Jack Miller, and their associates, he explained. Things might get worse before they get better, Chris warned me. I don't care, even if it gets messy. I'm going to make these people pay through Emily, I asserted. Okay, David. Recap what Jack Miller wanted, and we'll go from there, Chris said. We discussed several options, and I preferred the last one, a direct attack on Emily's workplace. I had leverage with the video evidence of Bennett, Miller, and Emily in their boardroom. Chris noted that as Emily's superiors, they had influenced her actions. Be prepared for serious legal consequences, Chris warned. Once Jack Miller realizes the extent of our evidence, he'll likely push for a settlement. If it's less than $2 million, he can forget it, I stated firmly. Let's aim for $2.5 million, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. Come over tonight at 7 p.m. Anna will make us a great dinner. You could use a break. I scheduled an appointment with Jack Miller for 2 p.m., Chris said. Right then, Linda popped into the office. Chris, Emily is on line 1, she said. Linda, I told you no calls, Chris snapped. Sorry, Chris, but Emily wants to talk to you, and I thought you might want to answer, Linda explained. All right, put her through. Does she know David is here? Not that I know of, Linda replied. Tell her I'll talk to her in a minute, he said, calming down. As Linda left, I bet she's discovered her cell phone, computer, and DVDs are missing, and she probably saw all her stuff on the front lawn, I said. Wow, you really had a night. Let me handle this call. Please don't interrupt. I need to clarify some things, Chris said, connecting the call. I could hear Chris's side of the conversation, imagining Emily's frantic replies. Hi, Emily. Yes, I talked to him. David is a good man and my friend. I thought you of all people would stand by him, not betray him. No excuses. Yes, I'm representing him. He has strong arguments. This won't be pleasant. You've shattered a man who loved you deeply. He doesn't care about your opinion. Get yourself a good lawyer, you'll need one. Yes, Jack Miller scheduled a meeting for 2 p.m., but I don't think you should attend. If you even try to eavesdrop, I'll advise David to leave, and things will escalate. It's better to stay away and keep composed today. I know he put your belongings on the lawn, but just as you can invite strangers into your bedroom, he can remove your possessions from the house. I'm surprised he didn't resort to violence last night. Yes, He was armed, but for self-defense. He believed you were in danger. It's in the police report. If it were my Anna, I'd be in jail now. I think David acted out of anger regarding your missing items. Talk to David, he probably left them on the lawn. I've handled all the escrow paperwork, and you both have equal rights. How you exercise these rights is up to you, Chris continued. He told her to stay put and let David remain in the house until things settled. He warned her not to push it and admitted he felt like punching her. He advised her to stay with Jessica and promised to be in touch. He also told her to have her lawyer contact him once they've hired one. Chris's demeanor was unyielding. He made it clear her tears wouldn't move him and that he could be ruthless when necessary. This was one of those times. He expressed regret that she would now see a side of him only his enemies knew and warned she wouldn't like it. Chris concluded by instructing Emily to keep her distance from David and stay at her office as he wanted nothing to do with her. Turning to me, Chris asked if I caught most of the conversation. Yeah, I did, I admitted. I want to confront her face to face and tell her how I feel, but I don't think I can bear seeing her again. Not yet. I have a couple of requests for you, David, Chris said, shifting to a more positive tone. First, give me those tapes. I handed him the videotapes from the envelope, the ones from last night, the footage of Mike at the tennis club, and the recordings of Emily with Bennett and Miller. Invite Linda to lunch, Chris instructed, seeing my puzzled look. He explained, I'll review these tapes to spare you more distress before our meeting with Miller. Watching them won't help you right now. You need to stay calm. Recognizing his wisdom, I thanked him and shared the good news with Linda. She joked about going to an upscale restaurant if Chris was paying. We laughed and left the office. Linda was a great lunch companion, helping me forget my troubles for a while. When we returned, we found Chris in high spirits, doing a little victory dance. These recordings are a game changer, David. I can't believe it, he exclaimed. My bittersweet expression must have clued him in. Oh, David, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much these videos hurt you. I was just excited about the evidence, he apologized. David, come over here. I need you to see something, Chris beckoned. I stood behind him, looking at the screen. Did you watch the entire video Mike shot at the tennis club with Emily? He asked. No, I only skimmed through some of it. It was tough to watch without wanting to lash out, I admitted. Brace yourself for this, Chris said, his tone grave. Right after Mike and Emily finished, a small crowd gathered in the men's locker room. Yes, the tennis club's locker room. It's hard to believe, but she allowed the other men who were watching to join in after Mike. I'm not sharing this to upset you but to show you the kind of person we're dealing with, Chris said, pointing to the screen on his desk. The man on the screen was older, draped in a towel with long gray hair and a walrus-like mustache. Do you recognize him? Chris asked, hitting play on the video. The man let the towel drop, revealing a physique any man would brag about, but the problem was he immediately went to my wife and started having sex with her. Then 5 more men surrounded her, eagerly waiting their turn. I have no idea who this guy is, but you seem to, I replied, struggling to stay calm. David, this is crucial for our meeting today at the tennis club at 4 p.m., Chris said, his excitement clear as he outlined his plan. I couldn't help but smile at his strategy. Besides being a friend, Chris was an outstanding lawyer, and I felt reassured having him on my side. We left his office for downtown, carrying a portable DVD player, some printed photos, and legal envelopes. When we arrived at the tennis club's building, we headed to Jack Miller's office on the top floor. Emily's office was just a floor below. After waiting in the reception area, we were finally ushered into Mr. Miller's lavish office. Just before entering, I felt someone's eyes on me from the hallway. I glanced over and saw a woman who quickly disappeared around the corner. Guess who, I thought, relieved I wouldn't have to face her today. Inside Jack's office, filled with opulent furniture, plaques, awards, and photos with notable figures. I wondered if he had ever brought Emily here. My disdain for Mr. Miller grew even stronger. "Hello, Mr. Miller. This is my friend Chris Hayes, and he'll be joining us today," I said as we shook hands. "Mr. Lewis, Dave, I thought this was supposed to be a private meeting between us," Mr. Miller said, surprised. "Well, I brought Chris along. Anything you need to say to me, you can say to him as well," I stated firmly, leaving no room for debate. He reluctantly accepted Chris's presence and continued addressing me while ignoring Chris, which made Chris smile. I knew what was coming, but let Mr. Miller speak first. "Dave, may I call you Dave?" Jack asked. "Sure, no problem. Actually, I think it would be good to have Mark Bennett here too. This concerns him as well," I suggested. After a pause, Jack pressed the intercom. "Julie, tell Mark to come to my office immediately. Drop everything and get here right away." "Understood. Mark will be here shortly," she replied. "In the meantime, I want to sincerely apologize for the trouble Mark and Emily have caused in your life. I know last night must have been terrible, but if we work together, we might find a solution that benefits everyone," Jack said optimistically. "What exactly do you mean, Mr. Miller?" I asked, waiting for Mark to arrive. "I genuinely care for your wife, Emily," Jack started but was interrupted by Mark's entrance. Mark hesitated, looking like he might leave, but Jack told him to sit down. Reluctantly, Mark obeyed, avoiding my gaze. "Dave, I want you to know I care for him like a daughter," he began, but Chris cut in. "Are you implying you have a penchant for incest, Mr. Miller?" Chris asked, catching him off guard. I chuckled, understanding Chris's point. "What are you accusing me of? Incest? What is this about?" he responded, clearly offended. "Let me show you." "A picture is worth 1,000 words, Chris said, placing the DVD player on Jack's desk. "These are screenshots from the video you're about to see," he said, handing them to Mark, who reluctantly passed them to Jack. The images clearly showed Jack and Mark with my wife, leaving no doubt about their actions. Jack probably recognized his own boardroom table where the events took place. "Are you telling me you recorded this and shared it?" Jack asked, nearly speechless. Mark was too stunned to respond. "Here's how it's going to go, Mr. Miller," Chris began, enjoying the moment. "Firstly, Emily keeps her job. David believes she'll need it and she fits in well here," Chris said with a wink at Jack. "Secondly, Mr. Bennett is out. Emily stays, he goes," Chris stated, pointing at the stunned Mark. "Thirdly, you will give us a financial offer that respects our intelligence. We'll consider your proposal and respond within 5 business days. We might take legal action within 2 months if necessary," Chris continued. Before they could react, Chris started the video showing Jack and Mark repeatedly engaging in sexual acts with my wife in their boardroom. Jack watched in shock while Mark looked away, already knowing the content. I could see Jack thinking about how to protect his business, family, and finances. "Mark, after these gentlemen leave, we need to discuss your future here," Jack said, his voice trembling. "I'll consult with my legal counsel to negotiate a settlement that might satisfy you to some extent," Jack mused aloud. "You both understand the potential repercussions for our business if this information were to leak prematurely." "Don't worry, Mr. Miller," Chris reassured him. "We'll keep this confidential until we receive a serious proposal from you. However, I wouldn't rush to fire Mr. Bennett just yet. He might have additional copies of the video, which could give him leverage if we don't act carefully. You and Mr. Bennett can handle that matter independently," Chris said. "Oh, and just so you're aware, both of you could face legal consequences for engaging in relations with an employee, which directly impacts your employment status and prospects," Chris added. As we stood to leave, Chris collected the DVD player and photographs we had brought. We exited, leaving Jack and Mark poised for a private discussion. I was about to ask Chris a question, but he gestured for silence until we were outside. I hadn't noticed my wife lurking around the corner, trying to eavesdrop, but Chris had. The last thing I heard was Mr. Miller barking into the intercom, "Get him here immediately." I grinned, anticipating an intriguing encounter as Jack would soon discover I had found his DVD at home. Once outside, I asked Chris why he had suggested Mark might use his own videotape against Jack. "Divide and conquer," Chris explained. "It's better if they don't present a united front but rather look out for themselves. That way, if Jack gives us a lowball offer, we can play them against each other. Also, both Mark and Jack have families and attend church. Despite their behavior in the videotape, they're not eager to rock the familial boat right now," Chris said. As we left the building, I realized it would now be remembered as the place where my wife betrayed me rather than her esteemed workplace. Chris's words snapped me back to reality. "All right, let's grab a beer before our next rendezvous at the tennis club at 4 p.m. We could both use a drink, and there's something I need to discuss with you, though I'm not quite sure how yet," Chris mentioned as we drove across town towards the tennis club. We stopped at a quaint bar restaurant adjacent to the tennis club. Chris ordered 2 beers and began speaking to me. "David, I believe Jack Miller will make an offer, likely just under $1 million. I'm familiar with his legal team from another case, and they're quite adept. He's also a realist. I'll call him tomorrow and let him know that a lowball offer won't bode well for his business or personal life. I'll propose around $3 million or suggest we abandon negotiations altogether," he disclosed. "Furthermore, I need to know if, in the event the offer is rejected, I have your authorization to cast Emily in an unfavorable light. I won't hold back. My duty as your legal representative is to pursue victory in court, even if it means exposing potentially damning revelations about Emily, your marriage, and even your personal life. It might get ugly and highly publicized, but I'll use every legal means to secure our case. You might not appreciate all the details that could surface at the 11th hour," Chris said. I expressed that I had given serious thought to the matter. I believed I possessed more integrity than they credited me for and was willing to proceed if necessary, though I preferred to explore the financial offer route first. Chris agreed and suggested starting by evaluating Jack's offer. He assured me that if Jack's offer was unsatisfactory, he would handle all the necessary paperwork promptly. Additionally, he mentioned leveraging his newspaper contacts and friends at 3 local news stations who would be willing to obtain footage and images, even if they needed to censor the explicit content with blue bars, as they say in sitcoms. "Chris, you've consistently been there for me, and I trust your judgment. I just wish this whole mess never happened. Being an oblivious husband was more enjoyable than being publicly humiliated by a cheating wife. Nevertheless, you have my authorization to take whatever actions are necessary. After all, I didn't start this debacle, but I'm determined to end it soon," I expressed with frustration in my voice. "Understood, David. No problem. Now let's discuss the material for our next meeting. This guy, Mr. Frank Nash, is the owner of the tennis club. He's the man I pointed out in the video in my office. He's likely to adopt a laissez-faire attitude, asserting that adults will be adults and he won't intervene. Even Mike's tennis coach might be dismissed for appearance's sake only to be rehired later. Mike's quite popular at the club, especially among female members. Keep in mind, David, that while men primarily pay club dues, women are also stakeholders. This dynamic will be pivotal in your interaction with Mr. Nash," he briefed me. We arrived just in time, and it was evident that Mr. Nash and Chris didn't see eye to eye. Their animosity was palpable from the outset. "Mr. Nash, this is Dave Lewis," Chris said, nodding in my direction. "His wife is a member of your club. It has come to our attention that Mike Johnson, your tennis instructor, was having an affair with Mr. Lewis's wife. We want to know what you plan to do about this," Chris finished. He waited for Nash to speak, but even I knew Nash would take it upon himself and in a few words send Chris to hell. "Listen, What two consenting adults do behind closed doors on their own time is none of my business, Frank Nash informed us. And as for you, Mr. Lewis, if you can't satisfy your wife in the bedroom, don't come crying to me and blaming me if she strays. Plenty of unhappy spouses frequent the tennis club, and some keep returning for the personalized attention my staff provides them. If you catch my drift, Frank said, winking at me. I felt the urge to lash out at him, but Chris restrained my wrist and quietly advised me to stay composed and follow his lead. Frank, you're assuming this happened outside the club without your knowledge or consent. That's quite a leap, Chris said, pulling out a DVD player and placing it on Frank's desk. He hit play, directing the screen toward Frank. The color drained from Frank's face as he watched the footage. Before Frank could respond, Chris jumped in. Frank, you and your colleagues knowingly took advantage of a paying member of your club, Mrs. Emily Lewis, a married woman whose dues were paid by Mr. Lewis. Now, Mr. Lewis is understandably a very dissatisfied customer. When word of this gets out, every dues-paying husband will question whether his wife is up to the same activities while he's paying the bills. I'll need to subpoena everyone present in the locker room that day. I doubt the married men will be happy with you, Chris said with a tone that made it sound like he was recounting a dramatic story. And there's the issue of privacy invasion from filming in the locker room, Frank added for emphasis. Here's what we want, a significant financial offer and swift action from you. This could save you a lot of trouble and money. We'll watch Frank Nash consider his options, Chris told me as we left the room. Chris grinned, collecting the DVD player and switching it off. Oh, and say hi to Victor Ramirez for me, Chris said to Frank as we left the room. Go to hell, Hayes, was Frank's only reply. Chris laughed all the way to the parking lot. Well, that was quite the adventure. Now we wait for offers, Chris told me as we headed to his house for a homemade dinner. By the end of the week, Jack Miller had offered nearly $2.7 million. Mark Bennett, after naively handing over all his tapes to Jack, found himself jobless as Jack swiftly fired him, leaving Mark with little recourse. I went after the two clients of Mark's who were involved with my wife. Both were desperate to avoid publicity for their companies and themselves, so each offered me $1 million to keep quiet. Frank Nash refused to make any offer, suggesting we take legal action instead. So we did. He ended up losing $3 million, and by the time we were done with him, his club faced a mass exodus of members, forcing him to give up ownership. He thought he could escape unscathed, but the judge was unimpressed with the locker room footage and the infidelity. I gave Emily a house and a car as she wanted, without paying a dime in child support. I saw her only twice in court, both times I called her a strumpet, which made her cry. I often wondered why she cried now but not before causing such chaos in my life. Following Chris's advice, I ended up with more money than I ever imagined, though the pain still lingered, haunting me to this day. Lost in thought, all the trials of that dreadful year came flooding back. I hadn't realized someone was speaking to me until I snapped out of my reverie and heard the restaurant manager asking if everything was okay. Unsure how long I had stood there, I shook my head to clear it and returned to the present. Sorry, just lost in some old memories. Thanks, I told the manager, noticing his curious glance, much like how people look at someone lost in their thoughts. I headed straight to my ex-wife's table. The shock on her face was clear. The last time she saw me, I was overweight with long hair and a beard, still nursing an old knee injury from baseball. That was my excuse, but in reality, I had settled into a complacent life with her. Now, with a shorter haircut, a fitter physique from regular workouts, and a repaired knee thanks to Mark and Jack's settlements, I looked very different. My suits were now high-end, and I made sure to present myself well in public. I decided to break the ice. You look amazing today, strumpet. Almost forgot how stunning you can be, I remarked deliberately, aiming to provoke her. My name is Emily, David. Why can't you call me by my name, she snapped, clearly agitated. I didn't give you the nickname, strumpet. You know who did. I just find it fitting. I warned you 3 years ago that you shattered my heart. I said you'd never forgive me. Mark called you a strumpet, and honestly, it's fitting. From now on, I will refer to you as such and never use your real name again. If you need to communicate with me, do it through Tad, I warned her. The man next to her started to rise in defense, but she urged him to stay seated. Tears began to well up in her eyes, smudging her makeup. Her reaction surprised me. I didn't think she still had any feelings left for me. Maybe it was guilt. I expect you to be gone when I return, she said tearfully, heading to the restroom as she wiped her eyes. I caught a glimpse of a sizable engagement ring on her finger. You must be Dave Lewis, Emily's ex-husband, he said with a sneer. Indeed, and you must be the new man she's been dreaming about, I replied, feeling his hostility. I'm Emily's CFO. I'd advise you to watch your language, he warned, clearly trying to avoid a scene. I only have a few questions, and then I'll be out of your life forever, I told him, noticing his puzzled expression. I've been where you are, and I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. I'm sure she's painted me as a terrible husband, abusive, neglectful, or a womanizer, but I'm not here to change your opinion of me. First question, does Jessica still host her Avon gatherings on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Emily helps Jessica with her decor sales on Mondays and Wednesdays. Your memory must be slipping, he retorted smugly. All right then, does she still play tennis on Saturdays? I asked. Emily plays tennis on Sundays. Your recollection seems pretty poor for someone who was married to her for so long, he said triumphantly. Final question, have you ever looked under the bottom drawer of the dresser in your living room? I inquired. No, why would I do that, he responded, clearly confused. The 3 questions I asked are why we're no longer together. I still have all the leftover divorce paperwork, emails from Jessica, and the other woman, and hours of videotapes. I've carried these with me for 3 years. I thought you should have them, I explained, pulling a worn piece of paper from my wallet. This is what the other woman wrote to Jessica when she asked how to get rid of me before I discovered her infidelity. After reading that letter, I realized I didn't know her at all, but it all revolves around you. I said, handing him the paper. I knew Emily's habits well. She always followed the same routine meticulously, sometimes driving me crazy. I suspected that even with a new man, she'd stick to her old ways. He hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him. He reached over and opened the letter. I've carried it for 3 years, rereading it occasionally and striving to better myself so that no woman would ever write such things about me again. Of all the evidence, that letter hit me the hardest, which is why I've kept it with me. He read the letter slowly, then set it down quickly. He grabbed a pen, scribbled a note on it, and abruptly left the restaurant without looking back or saying thanks. His face remained expressionless. I leaned over to see what he had written. I'll be back soon. Please wait here. I need to check under the bottom drawer of the living room dresser. Adam. I sensed he'd seen the truth, even if he didn't like it. The letter seemed to be the tipping point, and he needed to verify it himself, leaving a note on Emily's table. I left the restaurant. There was no way I was staying there tonight. In the lawyer, I called my client, who was fine with rescheduling our meeting since they were running late anyway. Before leaving, I glanced back at the table. Emily returned, searching for Adam, sitting down, noticing her old letter and Adam's note. Her face turned pale as she read them. The last time I saw my wife, she was sobbing so intensely that the entire restaurant stared. I felt a twinge of pity but was mostly indifferent. That was my final encounter with her. I still wonder if Adam found anything under the dresser drawer. Emily's tears suggested he might have.